All right, well, good afternoon and welcome to our video response series to the Post-Pandemic Future of Homeschooling Conference hosted by the Harvard Kennedy School. Now, if you haven't seen the first two videos of this series, you can find them on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook page. You can just search for the name HomeschoolFreedom and you'll find our pages. Now, there are still 4 weeks and 4 more topics remaining to be covered during the webinar. So be sure to hit subscribe or follow our Facebook page so you don't miss any future videos. My name is Copper Webb, and I'm a homeschool graduate, and I'm currently homeschooling my own 5 children. I'm also a governor with the Homeschool Community Foundation. The Homeschool Community Foundation exists to fund innovative projects that will increase the cultural impact of homeschooling. I'm here today with 3 other homeschool leaders as part of homeschoolfreedom.com, which is a project of the Alliance, a network of Christian homeschool organizations across the United States and Canada. Joining me today is Yvonne Bunn, Director of Support and Government Affairs for the Home Education Association of Virginia. Yvonne has a degree in elementary education and taught high school prior to homeschooling her own children for 18 years. Next on our panel is Joe Bailey. He is president of Homeschool Iowa and a homeschool dad of 6 children. Joe was homeschooled K through 12 and received his BS degree in mechanical and welding engineering from LeTourneau University. And our third panelist today is Dr. Jay Weil. Dr. Weil holds an earned PhD in nuclear chemistry, and he is best known as the author of the award-winning elementary, junior, and senior high school science courses. I know that we use them in our own homeschool. So we're very glad to have all of you here today for a roundtable discussion in response to week 3 of the Harvard event. Today's topic was of particular interest to me. It is, are homeschoolers prepared for life? Now, before we offer any specific commentary on the session that we just watched, I want to start by letting our panelists introduce themselves and talk about their work within the homeschool community, and let us know, how have you been able to interact with, observe, and evaluate homeschool graduates? Let's start with you, Yvonne.
Well, I'm Yvonne Bunn, and I've been with Home Educators Association of Virginia for almost 35 years now. So I'm a homeschool mom of 3, and I homeschooled during the 80s once the law was passed in Virginia. And I've worked with our state organization in protecting homeschool laws and advancing good homeschool laws for Virginia homeschoolers. So I work with a lobbyist team in the General Assembly. We write legislation. We also communicate with the media, legislators, the homeschool community, and share a series of how to begin homeschooling seminars through our website, through our conventions when we can have a convention. Do a lot of counseling, phone counseling, writing articles and things. So just a variety of things.
Joe Bailey here.
Oh,
Sorry,
great.
Copper. Yep, Joe Bailey here with, I'm based in Iowa. As Copper said, I was homeschooled K through 12. My wife was also homeschooled. We homeschool our children, so very plugged into the community, got to grow up seeing homeschooling, experiencing it firsthand, as well as seeing my peers and their success stories. And even at the workplace today, I work with a number of homeschool graduates here at Premier Corporation where I work. So in addition to that, I volunteer with Homeschool Iowa and also a little bit with the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. And so very many interactions with homeschooling.
Great.
And I'm Jay Weil. I got introduced to homeschooling when I was professor at Ball State University because my best college students were homeschool graduates. Didn't know anything about homeschooling. That's what got me interested in homeschooling, was simply I was getting my best college students from the homeschool community. That got me, lecturing to homeschoolers, which got me writing homeschool curriculum. I still do teach from time to time now at Anderson University instead of Ball State University, and it's still the same. My best students are the homeschool graduates.
Amazing. Well, my first question is, did the panelists today answer the question? Did they answer the question of, are homeschoolers prepared for life? You want to start, Dr. Weil?
They didn't, and it's unfortunate because there's a lot of data out there. They did sort of the typical thing an academic does when the data say something they don't want to believe. They simply say that the data are inadequate. So, for example, the best evidence of this is when they said there's no evidence that a homeschoolers demonstrate a higher college GPA. That is utterly false. I haven't seen a single study that says that they even are average. Boston University studied their their entire population over many years. Homeschooled graduates averaged a 3.3 GPA compared to the non-homeschooled graduates of 2.9. Baylor University, it was 3.4 compared to 3.0. University of St. Thomas, it was 3.5 compared to 3.2. Ave Maria University, 3.1 compared to 2.8. York Technical College, 3.0 compared to 2.7. And this is important because that's a range of universities. They go from very exclusive, Boston University, highly exclusive in terms of who they accept. York Technical College, if the check clears, you're in. And regardless of whether we talk about highly selective universities or technical colleges, homeschoolers on average do better. I simply, in the question and answer, ask a very simple question that would be very quick to answer, and they never even bothered to ask it. And the question was, every study I have seen on homeschoolers and college university is that the homeschoolers have higher GPAs. Is there any study that says otherwise? And the answer, as far as I know of the literature, is no. There's one study that Kunzman likes, where it asks the students themselves, what do you expect your GPA to be? And the students expected a lower GPA. But when studies actually say what GPAs did they get, the homeschool students always do better. And so, but what Kunzman and Gaither and all those people have done is simply ignored these studies because they say they're inadequate in some way. And so they just throw it away. And that's the problem. Same with when they said there's no evidence that there's there's a higher quality of education in homeschooling when the parents' demographics are taken into a case. In fact, every study that I've seen that tries to take demographics into case indicates that when demographics are taken into account, homeschoolers still do better. So I was very disappointed, and I think you can see that because what you saw was they didn't just address any studies. They didn't talk about any specific studies. They gave you no numbers. All they said was, we can't answer the question. You can't answer the question because you don't want to.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think that they didn't answer the question at all. I do think there were some positive aspects of this presentation that were more positive than the previous two that we have seen. I remember a number of years ago, I read a quote from the admissions director at Dartmouth, and he said that homeschoolers had a distinct advantage because of one-on-one instruction. And so they were seeing the advantage that homeschool students who came to their university had because they were instructed one-on-one. So I think there are a lot of things that have been ignored. Of course, there is a lot of information out there that they just chose not to look at. And that was a shame. But I don't think they really they said the question was not answerable. I think that's an interesting approach to begin with.
Yeah, and I just like to add to that. They actually implicitly accepted the fact that homeschool graduates do better at the university, because when they were asked in college admissions, is there any discrimination, Jolly said some anecdotal story that made no sense. But Wilkins actually said, oh yeah, there's discrimination, but it's in favor of homeschooling. And if you want to know whether or not homeschooling works, look at admission policies. The Ivy Leagues who do publish their results, a lot of them don't, but the Ivy Leagues who do publish their results every year consistently accept a higher percentage of their homeschooled applicant pool than the rest of their applicant pool. To me, that answers the question.
It does. It does.
This is from the last decade, but at one point Stanford was accepting 27% of homeschool applicants. Compare that with 5% of traditional applicants.
Mm-hmm. Wonder why. That's right.
Actually, Jonathan Ryder, who is the head of Stanford's admissions unit, when he made this quote, he's no longer that, but when he made this quote, he actually gave the answer why. He said the distinguishing factor is intellectual vitality. Homeschool kids have it, and everything they do is responding to it. That's almost a direct quote from him.
What do you think, Joe? Did the panelists answer the question today?
Yeah, I don't think they did. And you can certainly always wish for more data. And in my workplace, I often have to do research on topics to figure something out. And I always come away wishing I had more data and a clearer picture. But at the end of the day, to do business, you got to make the best decision you can from the information you have. And I think often personal experience speaks very highly to trying to answer the question as well. You know, what did I observe? What did I see? How did I interpret this data? And for me personally, looking at homeschooling, it's an easy call. Yes, it's a success because I lived it and I watched my peers lived it, not just myself, but my friends, and saw the success stories. Yes, they looked different. There was different flavors, different styles, but all of them came out as wonderful people who are in their community, actively serving, who have good jobs, who are raising their own families. There's a lot of really great success stories out there, and it's fun to see.
And, you know, I think another thing that's important is to note that they really ignored information that's been made to the public. When you look at ACT scores, SAT scores, homeschoolers are higher than public school, government school, even private school students. And so they just chose to ignore that type of information that is just right out there on the College Board. You can see that. And so I think that, you know, it's a shame that that information is there because it shows academic preparation for life. I mean, it shows that homeschoolers are doing a good job. And these, of course, in most cases are parents who may not have college degrees or high income, or, you know, we're just seeing that it's one-on-one tutoring that's making a difference with homeschool families.
I think it's interesting to note that just this year, Global Perspectives on Home Education in the 21st Century was published, and it's kind of a compilation of multiple research articles. And I'm taking this directly from the publication, that numerous researchers have studied that the outcomes of those who are home educated with very positive results. And the research outcome on homeschool graduates is generally the same: a highly successful, highly educated, civically minded individual who is curious, self-directed, entrepreneurial.
Mm-hmm.
And even the small percentage of homeschool students who have expressed dissatisfaction with their experience fit the above profile. So I would say, and again, just drawing from my experience of being a homeschooler and continuing in the homeschool community, that it's not just academic success, but homeschooling produces well-rounded individuals.
Yes.
Well, let's talk about the bulge, the huge increase in numbers, especially in low income and single parent families. The comment was made that these numbers are so big that the data shouldn't be ignored. How would you respond to that?
I don't think that's quite the situation. I think it's interesting that they use the term "the bulge." That's pretty. It may be pretty descriptive of what we've seen happen during the COVID-19 situation that we've all experienced during the past year. I mean, schools closed. They offered something to the public. And I think parents began to see that, well, this is what they're learning. This is what they're teaching. I think they weren't prepared to do as much virtual as they were required to do. And I think parents began to see, hey, I can do a better job than this. I can do better with my own schedule, with my own child's learning needs. And so I'm going to homeschool. And so we saw a tremendous growth in homeschooling. And here in Virginia, we saw about a 48% increase in the homeschool numbers. In fact, just here, we went up from 44,000 to 65,000 this year, just in Virginia alone. And so I think parents realize they can do it. Now, whether or not this will continue to be the trend or they'll continue to homeschool, I realistically don't think so. I think there were parents who had to homeschool because they felt that this would be the better thing for their children, but this may not be a permanent situation for them. But I think there'll still be parents, a large number of parents who have seen, hey, I can do this, and they will continue to homeschool. We don't know the numbers, but I do think Some will go back, but I believe we've seen parents who've been encouraged, parents who now know that they can do this.
Just to speak to an example here in Iowa, we had on our Homeschool Iowa forum on Facebook posed this question of how many people are going to continue homeschooling through after post-pandemic. And we expected, as you said, Yvonne, that there would be a mixed response, and we weren't quite sure what that percentage would be. But just looking at just the comments that people made, it was about a 50-50 split of people saying, no, we're going back, and others like, wow, this is really cool. We want to keep homeschooling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm more on Yvonne's position here. I think I'm a little skeptical that a lot of these people who are homeschooling are really homeschooling. I do agree with Yvonne that some people found out they could and they will keep going. And so the homeschool numbers will be higher once all the dust settles than it was before, but it won't be 20%. It won't be 10%. It'll be a few percent.
So going off that question, whose job is it to act upon this information, this data that we shouldn't ignore? Should this data drive policy?
Well, I really appreciated the question that was posed kind of along these lines of, hey, well, if we can't interpret the data, right, if there is no trend, which we've argued that that's not the case, but then do we have a basis for making policy? And shouldn't we just leave it up to the parents? And so I really appreciate that question as expressed in the panel, and would wholeheartedly agree. I think at the lowest, most local level is the best place to make a decision, and leaving it to the parents to see the fruits or lack thereof of homeschooling and decide what is best for educating their children.
Well, I do think the state has a vested interest in having a population with a minimum of basic skills. I think that's necessary. You know, I think Dr. Peterson, the guy who sort of started it all off, and he added the comment about, well, if the data are inconclusive, why shouldn't we just leave it up to the parents? I think he was by far the most reasonable of the panelists.
I agree.
And and he specifically said, hey, look, this whole idea of compulsory education is really new. So, you know, is it something we really should, you know, really work hard for? And I do think at some point, this is the state's problem, because let's say the state should regulate. Well, we've already seen how good that regulation works, how well that regulation works. Look at the public schools. The public schools aren't giving the kids a basic set of skills. They're giving some kids a basic set of skills. They're giving others a below average set of skills, but they're giving a huge number of students no skills at all. And if the states can't even regulate their own institutions, how in the world are they going to regulate private families? I just don't see it's practical. I think the first thing that any sort of group that talks about regulation needs to do is address, how can we make our regulations more effective in our own institutions? Then once that's figured out, maybe we can then branch into other areas.
I totally agree. I think that's where the need is. I think that's where their focus needs to be, because, you know, when they were talking about the average homeschooler, and there is no average homeschooler any more than there is an average public school student either. And so, you know, the data that they don't have should not be the basis of any regulations. And homeschooling is regulated by most states. Not all states have high regulation, but there is some form of regulation in most states through the state government. And so we don't need the federal government top down governing the family and what happens in the homeschool. It's in the home. It's up to the parents, not to the state or to the federal government, to say what curriculum we should use, what philosophy of education we should use. You know, all education is couched by some type of philosophy from the teacher who actually talks to the student and shares the information. And so I think we need to keep that within the family. So I don't think there was anything that they showed today that indicated there was a reason for any tighter regulation than there already is on homeschool families, if any at all.
I agree. I thought it was really interesting in the discussion today that it was pointed out that perhaps our understanding of homeschoolers is skewed by dropouts who are hiding under the guise of homeschooling. And it was brought up in the state of Alaska that a lot of times students who are struggling in school are kind of pushed out and encouraged to pursue other methods of education, oftentimes in environments where they have no at-home support. Now, I know that in the state of Indiana, they had some issues with this when homeschoolers showed up in their school to prison pipeline report. And the IAHE Action, you can find them at iaheaction.net. They have a very lengthy response to this specific issue in the state of Indiana. But I was wondering if you have noticed any such practices in your states.
In Virginia, very rarely does this happen. I have heard of it before that different schools or a school superintendent's liaison would kind of indicate to a family that, well, maybe you just ought to homeschool. But I think it's very rare in Virginia that we have seen this. And we do have good connections with the district superintendents. That's where our notice of intent is filed in the state of Virginia. And so we talk to them about not doing this, that not everyone is a good candidate for homeschooling. And so you don't want to force a family into this in order to keep their graduation numbers high. And so I think that that's something we don't want to lump homeschoolers into this. And so we do talk to those superintendents. We encourage them not to encourage some families to homeschool when they're not interested in it. They don't have the resources. And then when we talk to families who call us, because the superintendents have our numbers, and they will give that to potential homeschool families. And when they talk with us and our counselors, we talk to them about how to be prepared and what's required. And we're there to help them in every way that we can. But we don't want to be lumped into this situation of homeschoolers being dropouts. You look at the military, they have a system in place to make sure that you've been homeschooled a certain amount of time before you can actually join the military, to make sure that you are a valid homeschool student. So we need to be careful of that, but I don't think it's widespread. It may be in Alaska because homeschooling has been going on a long time there, and they have kind of a different system there with a lot of correspondence courses. But I don't see that as a major trend in our state at all.
Have you noticed that in Iowa, Joe?
We haven't noticed a major trend in that direction. I'm sure it happens at times. We've had a couple of high-profile cases where there was abuse in a home, and at the time the parents happened to be operating under homeschool law. Those cases were already ongoing when they were in the public school district, and it wasn't connected necessarily to the homeschooling. But anyway, so we've had some examples where maybe the data could be a little, but not very many, and I'm not aware of a trend there.
I think it's important to point out that there already are a lot of safeguards to prevent dropouts, and a lot of the time those policies are not acted upon. So I don't necessarily find the fault within a state's individual homeschool notice laws. One comment that I thought was really interesting was that homeschooling has moved away from being the single parent at the kitchen table, and that homeschooling methods and resources are now very diverse and varied. I think that is so true. As someone who was homeschooled during the 80s and the 90s, there were very limited resources available, and my home education really was at the kitchen table with my mom.
Mm-hmm.
But now that I'm homeschooling my own children, and I have a rising 9th grader this year, really there are so many resources for him to learn, and I see myself more in a director role rather than doing a lot of the direct teaching. I think that is pretty true nationwide, I would say. The question was raised from that point was, should there be a policy change to make other resources more available for homeschoolers? Should there be a policy change to make it easier for homeschoolers to take 1 or 2 public school classes? Should there be a policy change to make it easier for homeschoolers to attend dual enrollment college classes? Now, I know that in a lot of states, public school students can access free or reduced tuition at a local college, whereas homeschool or private students are excluded from that program. How would you answer that question? Should there be some policy changes to make resources more available to homeschoolers?
I do think there need to be policy changes, but I think the policy changes need to be at the local level, within school districts, local school districts, school boards, or at the state level and the state's legislative body. That's where those changes need to be made if it needs to go that far. Very often, I think we can make changes if we start dealing with our local school boards. These are kind of the entry level elected officials that are there dealing with educational issues. And so as we can communicate, work with local school boards, introduce legislation in our general assemblies and make the changes that way, if we can't reason at the local level, I think that would be a better way to do it. I don't think it needs to be national policies.
Well, and I'd just like to make the point that, yeah, I agree with you on it needs to be local. There's no other way to do it. But I would make the point that these policy things and everything, making different things available to homeschoolers, that's really for the parents' benefit. It's not for the students' benefit. Students do extremely well when it's mom in the kitchen table. They always have. And I agree, now there are a lot more things that are available, and that's good, but it's good for the parents. Honestly, I think in a lot of ways, the homeschooling student has been disadvantaged by all of these new things that are available because we take too much advantage of them. And we're getting away from the model that really, really did work, which is at home at the kitchen table.
That's a really interesting point, Dr. Weil. I like that. I also like your point of about the local level decisions. I mean, we even have an example of that just this year in the state of Iowa, where we were able to influence a law change to make parent-taught driver's ed universal for any parent, homeschooled or not. And so that was really exciting to see that change. And I've just been excited to see how even in the private sector, there's huge shifts in making resources more available to students. Our local Christian school allows students now to dual enroll. That didn't used to be a thing, and now it is. We have local academies that you can do. It's kind of almost like a larger co-op program where you can send your kids there for a few days and then teach the curriculum at home for a few days. And I find a lot of parents, friends of ours, who find that model compelling and helpful. To your point, Dr. Weil, to the parents. It's really helpful for them, makes it easier for them. So anyway, I think the options are ever expanding. I don't know that there needs to be, certainly not on a national level, there needs to be any policy changes. It's growing, it's coming, and it's great.
Well, I want to give you an opportunity. Any other additional comments that you wanted to make regarding today's webinar?
Well, I'll go ahead and say I expected more of Harvard University. I really did. I mean, if this is one of the leading thinkers in education, then we're in real trouble. Fortunately, they're not. But they relied on Kunzman and Gaither, who are both very anti-homeschooling. They try and pose themselves as unbiased observers. At least I say, look, I'm biased. I'm for homeschooling. They're clearly against it, but they try and fashion themselves as unbiased. And as a result, they throw away all of this data. They ignored some of the more well-known researchers in homeschooling who actually know a little bit more about homeschooling. So I was very disappointed. I don't think if I haven't watched any of the others, so if this is indicative of what they're doing, I probably won't watch any more either.
I'd like to say that I did like Dr. Paul Peterson's comment near the end when he said, if it's not clear what's going on, if we don't know, if we're not certain, then should we just let people make their own choices? And I think that was kind of well, it was framed as a question, but I think it was also a very positive statement because, these studies, these things, they say they don't have the information. So I don't think they're in a position to be developing policy based on so little information that they have. So I thought that was a very positive question that he put out there to the panel.
Great comments. I just like to always remind myself that human knowledge and research is flawed. We don't know everything under the sun. We can't figure it all out. And often we end up making decisions, if you look back through history, as communities, as societies, as governmental bodies, make decisions that are actually harmful, that we thought were well-intentioned, but created problems down the path. And so, but what does seem to be a true trend throughout history is generally freedom tends to allow the good ideas to rise to the top and the bad ideas to be weeded out. And so I think taking that freedom approach and letting the parents decide can ultimately allow the best ideas to take place and take root in society.
Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed today's conversation. So thank you, Dr. Weil. Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you, Joe, for being here to discuss today's webinar. And thank you to all of our viewers online. If you would like to continue the conversation, we invite you to hop over to our Facebook discussion group, which is called HomeschoolFreedom Discussion Group. Super easy to find on Facebook. So we'll be back next week, and I hope that you'll join us then. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.